All right, so welcome back into the live stream today. We're going to be diving into helium, and really in a big way, I think, in the sense of what helium is. Many of you guys have heard us talk about helium many times. We'll get into all kinds of details around this. Obviously, the origins of helium started around the IoT network. We'll kind of break down what that means, all that good stuff. My name is Paul Barron. Welcome back into Tech Path. Today, of course, joining me is Amir Haleem, who is the founder and CEO of Helium. Great to have you on the show, Amir.
Hey, Paul, great to be here.
Yeah. So a lot has happened since the last time we talked with Frank. Well, actually, we talked to Frank about this time last year. Um, and then later in the year, he gave us quite a bit of a rundown on kind of the evolution of Helium. Essentially, a lot of the news back then was as you guys merged into 5G. But I want to talk a little bit about the framework of Helium as a whole. For some of our audience, they may not necessarily completely understand what you guys are up to. Give us a rundown.
Best way of thinking about Helium is a decentralized infrastructure provider, right? Like the goal of what we're doing is to try and put access to networks and control of networks in the hands of people, right? Telecom industry has been, the telecom industry specifically, has been one of those industries that's practically impossible for like a regular person to get into, right?
Right.
If you thought about Uber or Airbnb as kind of a model, right, of someone becoming a fleet operator or someone getting involved in the hospitality industry. Helium is kind of a decentralized version of that applies to telecom. Anyone can buy relatively inexpensive hardware, put it on their property, and become effectively a miniature cell site operator. And we think that's a pretty
Yeah.
revolutionary idea.
Yeah, I think when we've had a chance to explore the framework of what Helium operates on, mostly what it has been, engaged in is the IoT side of things. Obviously, with 5G, that changed a little bit. Talk to me a little bit about the transitions that you have gone through in the past year, especially transitioning from just IoT networks into more advanced solutions. Obviously, we'll talk about the T-Mobile partnership, all that good stuff. But what the course of how all this is happening right now? Where is the end of this? Where do you see this going?
Yeah, we started focused on IoT when we started the company, actually reasonably long time ago now, back in 2013. Our focus was IoT simply because we thought it was the least well-served sector in telecom. Right? There really were
Hmm.
no IoT networks. Like if you're building a sensor or a low-power device, like there was no way for you to deploy that in any cost-effective way or any way that maintained good battery life, and that kind of stuff that's important in the IoT realm. We always wanted to look at other types of wireless network. When we wrote the first white paper, I think it was in 2018. We included in it there, like we want to investigate other methods, right? Like other
Right.
networks that you could apply the same tactics to. And there are different challenges for every kind of network, right? So for cellular in particular, for example, access to spectrum is a huge problem, right? Like spectrum is privately held by huge telcos, and regular people like us can't really get access to it, right? And
Hmm.
so one of the biggest changes that occurred over the last several years was CBRS, which is a citizens band radio service, is an unlicensed block of spectrum that the FCC made available, and it allows regular, non-multi-billion-dollar spectrum holders to operate a cell network, right? And so things like that have changed over the course of time, which have given us the opportunity to expand beyond just IoT and really create what we described in HIP 51 as this network of networks, and HIPs in the Helium universe are this sort of community governed proposal system. Just for anyone who wasn't familiar, so Helium has transitioned away from being, a singular IoT network to now this network of networks, and it's sort of a rising tide lifts all boats kind of a concept.
Yeah, I was looking here. It's just some of the notes. 950,000 hotspots globally, 3 years, expanding now, obviously into your framework there of networks. 4,000 hotspots in 1,000 cities nationwide. This is obviously U.S. That are providing cellular coverage. Talk to me a little bit about the bigger transition that you guys did, obviously with the HIP-70 and the transition over to the Solana chain.
HIP 70 is most people I think have focused on the Solana part, and that's certainly a big part of it. But the bigger architecture story here is Helium growing from 150 hotspots in Austin to a million hotspots worldwide in less
Hmm.
than 3 years.
Yeah.
I don't remember. It's like 65,000 cities, 150 countries. Like the numbers are staggering. And as a result of that, we've encountered a lot, right? Like it was the largest peer-to-peer network that had ever been built. And there's a unique set of scaling challenges that we've had to sort of, navigate throughout every single stage of the network's life. When we launched in 2019, or when we started building in 2017, really, there weren't many options for how you would do this. You were either using Ethereum or you were building something yourself. And we ended up with the building something yourself kind of option.
Yeah.
And over time, the things have changed. Solana now exists. Other L1 blockchain solutions exist, and we want to remain very focused on building wireless networks, and we want to leave the blockchain part to people who are very focused on building blockchains. And we think Solana is kind of best in breed at that.
What were some of the key things that you guys were facing that said, hey, maybe this is the route for us to take? What were some of those challenges that you saw kind of in the roadmap that made you make this decision, or helped you kind of go in this direction, I should say?
Yeah, the best way I think of thinking about it is what is truly differentiated about Helium is really two things: it's proof of coverage and the economic model behind data transfer, right? So proof of coverage is kind of the system that rewards people for building the network at the start, and then the data transfer piece, I think, should be somewhat obvious, but that's sensors and now subsequently cell phones, moving data back and forth across the internet. We wanted to make sure those two things are as reliable and as consistent as possible. And today, the current design of the system is very monolithic, right? All of the complicated
Right.
pieces around proof of coverage and data transfer are deeply embedded into the L1 blockchain that we built. And that makes it very difficult to iterate quickly on changes and improvements and basically do anything fast, right? It's a very brittle system where touching any one thing can cause massive disruptive effects elsewhere in the system, kind of like a big Jenga
Gotcha.
tower, right? Like
Yep.
you move one thing, the whole thing starts to wobble. And so it's made it difficult for us to make changes and fix things that we know need to be fixed. And so fundamentally, HIP 70 is about blowing apart the system, right? So instead of a monolithic system, I have the idea of these oracles that live separately to the blockchain, that are responsible for data transfer, for proof of coverage. And that kind of leaves the L1 blockchain part really only with the responsibility of moving tokens around and confirming transactions. And once you get to that point of architecture, it's like, well, why would we maintain our own L1 anymore, right? We should delegate that part to someone who's excellent at that. And you get all kinds of benefits when you do that. You become part of the bigger ecosystem of developers that Solana has. You get access to these DeFi protocols, NFT marketplaces, better exchange support, better wallet support. We're kind of on an island on our own and have to do everything ourselves on our current network. So I'm super excited about being able to attach to this bigger community that are doing all kinds of like amazing things.
Yeah, when we looked at, okay, so when the news came out that we actually did a video breakdown of the Helium Solana challenge and what HIP 70 would be doing, the thing that interested me, at least when we were monitoring, we monitor mostly sentiment data on a lot of the blockchain projects out there. It kind of gives us a little bit of the community vibe. One thing that was interesting was there was some, I won't call it negativity, but there definitely was some pushback from some of the audience and some of the community. But at the same time, what we were finding was that there seemed to be an underlying effort around HIP 70 that was very pro, the whole approach. And if you look at just your voting, the final results, I mean, I was amazed that you were at 81% of the overall community in this. So this was a landslide for, the community itself. From a governance standpoint, I mean, typically you don't see these kinds of performances. So obviously behind it in a big way. What made you guys select Solana? Because I mean, there's a handful of other projects out there that could have gone onto this proposal here. Why go the Solana route other than developers kind of where they're going? Because there's some knocks against Solana with outages and the chain is still in beta. Those kind of things. What was the contributing factor?
There's a bunch. I mean, one of the most critical components, and I don't see this talked about that often, actually, even in the HIP discussion, was private key compatibility. And it doesn't sound that exciting, but the key part of that It's a terrible pun. I just realized that the most important part of that is that um, the migration for Helium users should be very straightforward. Because both Solana and Helium use the same private key type, it means that Helium users will one day wake up and still use the same wallet app, still use the same 12 or 24 words that they've always used, but now be on the Solana chain. Whereas if we
Mhm.
had used something like Ethereum, there would have had to been a migration step, right? Some point
Ah,
where you kind of went to some trusted service and said, "Hey, here are my 12 words or 24 words, and I'm migrating this wallet to that wallet." And I think that's extremely risky. You've got
yeah.
people on vacation, you've got scammers and hackers that are
Oh,
going to try
big
and take
time.
advantage of this to capture those private keys. And so that was a huge consideration, is like, how can we make the migration so seamless that just one day it happens and you didn't really know.
Hmm.
So Solana was one of very few chains where that compatibility existed. um, I do think the point about the large developer ecosystem is absolutely critical. We want to, like, as quickly as possible, get to the place where the community can meaningfully contribute to the Helium network from a code point of view. The decisions that we made around the monolithic design and the certain programming languages that we use, I think, have made it hard for the community to contribute in a meaningful way. So I think moving to a platform that has a very active and expert developer ecosystem, I think, is very important from that point of view.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you get into the stuff that you had on the matrix there, which are all obviously very important points: transaction cost, transaction speed, exchange compatibility, like stuff like that is of course critical, and transaction cost probably the most critical of that list, because you would get to this place on something like Ethereum where effectively the chain would be down, right? Like, it would be too
Right.
expensive to send transactions, and you'd have to just wait, which is effectively the same as an outage. So those were sort of the things that we thought about. But definitely for me personally, like, the private key thing was a big deal, because otherwise the migration just sounded like a potentially a disaster if you had to rely on people actually taking a migration step.
With the size of the Helium network and network of networks now, because you look at the potential here around congestion issues within networks. We've already faced this around the blockchain, all over the place. Obviously, Solana has been one of those that has probably been the most, public in terms of the most coverage, people talking about it. Will the fact that the Helium ecosystem have any pressure on the overall, congestion scenarios that might play out within the Solana blockchain, or is that just not necessarily relevant in terms of traffic?
We certainly hope not. I mean, part of the design of HIP 70 is to, I don't know whether aggregate or roll up, or what the right word is there, but the Oracle design in HIP 70 is really one of aggregation, right? So a lot of the transactions will really be off chain, so things like proof of coverage, which is hotspots transmitting data packets over RF radio waves and receiving them and signing them, and the whole process that goes on there. That will all be kind of off chain, and the
Hmm.
oracles will send fewer transactions on chain, right? So that, like, optimally, and there's a lot of reasons for that, right? Reliability is one of them, transaction cost is one of them, consistency is one of them. But the end result should be that there are fewer transactions getting written to the chain itself, and we hope that that helps significantly with any congestion issues or any outage issues. And the same, goes for data transfer. And
Yeah.
if the blockchain itself happens to be down, then those oracles will continue to do their work. They just won't be able to settle token balances
Yeah.
until the blockchain comes back. And so that kind of consistency was very important in our thinking in HIP 70. We have to account for the network being down sometimes, or the network being too expensive to use, or any of those scenarios shouldn't affect the users of the Helium network, for whom data transfer reliability especially is critical.
Yeah, very critical. Interesting that you're talking about, the accumulation of, almost in a way like TDMA, CDMA works for mobile and cell networks, packet delivery. A lot of people understand that from a networking aspect. But to your point, being able to roll those up and then you use fewer transactions when you deliver a packet. So I can see that as a good thing for kind of that exchange between Helium and Solana. So that's a positive. You mentioned earlier slightly about the wallet. You said, would there be a change on the wallet, or would it flip over to a Phantom wallet? How would that work within a Helium user versus a Solana Phantom wallet once that you guys make the full migration?
Yeah, so our wallet will become Solana compatible, for want of a better word. So,
Okay.
one day your wallet is just going to be a Solana wallet. You could also use any other wallet in the Solana ecosystem, whether it's Sat Phantom or Solflare or any
Yeah.
of them that are all excellent. And one of the important things, at least for me, that we get out of a migration like this is we also get hardware wallet support, like in the form of Ledger. We've had Ledger support for a long time, but it's never been first class. You've always had to use a command line interface to sort of assist, and that's not
Right.
straightforward for like the vast majority of users. And we've done everything we can to push that along. But we understand from a security point of view, the Ledger team is extremely cautious about which code they allow access onto their platform, and so it's a
Mhm.
long and slow process with those guys. And again, just one of the benefits of moving over to an ecosystem that's well established, it is things like wallet support. So I guess the quick version is you can do nothing if you want and continue to use the Helium wallet, but if you prefer to use Phantom or Solflare or any other Solana ecosystem wallet, you can also do that.
Good. I think this is it's a good understanding, at least because I think a lot of our viewers, listeners, etc., really they've been Helium fans. We see Helium's always one of our most viewed videos, and I think it's from the standpoint of kind of like what you talked about is the idea of what Helium is trying to do from a communication standpoint, especially now that you're moving into essentially mobile. I was looking at your Twitter announcement here, say obviously Helium Mobile, for world's first crypto carrier, bringing the power of the people's network right to your phone. So, first of all, how did this partnership come about? Because this is a pretty dynamic thing to see crypto projects like Helium with a major carrier like T-Mobile start to merge. Because it really does give, and it's something I've always said, Helium's probably one of the true utility use cases in crypto that's out there. This really kind of takes it to the next level. How did this partnership start off?
When we announced Helium 5G, which I think was quite a long time ago now, actually, at least a year ago, the desire of building the Helium network was always to be a sort of companion network to existing telecom infrastructure. Like we're not under, quite frankly, any illusion that you can build a macro network using unlicensed CBRS spectrum. We wish that that were true, but there's all sorts of reasons around physics and congestion that we think will make it either impossible or extremely difficult. I could imagine, by the way, some future where there's a Spectrum DAO or something that buys $20 billion worth of spectrum at the next auction or something. But we're not quite there yet. I hope that we get there. So the idea behind Helium 5G was always to be a companion network, and the question was how best to be a companion network. The optimal or the initial strategy was, can we start to build a network using proof of coverage as a incentive scheme, the same way we did in IoT, and then work with telcos, the major telcos, Verizon, AT&T, and then obviously T-Mobile, to try and what they call in the industry offload data, right? Which is if a T-Mobile user is near a Helium hotspot, that they would start to use a Helium hotspot because it's cheaper or it's in a location that they don't have great coverage or whatever it may be. And an airport is a pretty decent example of that, right? When you go
Mm-hmm.
inside an airport, usually someone else is actually operating that cellular infrastructure, but they have a relationship with the carriers, and it seems
Right.
seamless, to the end user. That's still to me the most optimal outcome, but it takes time to get there, right? There's a lot that has to be proven about what Helium 5G is trying to do. And so we always had this other plan in mind, which was, while that is occurring, can we kind of bootstrap the demand side of the network in this way by having an actual like consumer or subscriber facing product? And of course, the challenge with that is the Helium network at the start, the 5G network, is too small, right, to be useful enough in a broad way, right? Like if you're a existing T-Mobile customer, for example, like there's no way for you to consider switching to Helium 5G when there's
Sure.
only 5,000 hotspots in the whole country, right? It's
Yeah.
not feasible. It has to work perfectly. And so the solution for that is to engage in this hybrid relationship with one of the carriers, and T-Mobile is our carrier partner for this. And the idea behind the hybrid strategy is that a Helium Mobile subscriber will primarily use Helium hotspots when they're available, but when they move outside of range of a Helium hotspot, they will start to use the T-Mobile
T-Mobile.
macro
Yeah.
network instead. And the benefit of that design is that you start to onboard users and demand and customers and data flow very, very early on, right? You're no longer waiting for the network to reach critical mass before you can start doing that. And it causes this sort of dual-sided flywheel where, the more Helium hotspots there are, the cheaper the cost of using Helium Mobile becomes, right? Because the cost of
Okay.
the Helium 5G network is much cheaper than a traditional telecom model. And then as more customers start to use Helium Mobile, the more Helium 5G hotspot owners earn in the form of HNT and due to the data credit economic design. So it's very exciting that way, right? Because it's not a traditional kind of MVNO model by any means. It's a what we're calling a crypto carrier, which is, your phone is effectively going to try and pick the cheapest thing it can at all times. And if a Helium hotspot is in range, then it will do that, and that will benefit the entire Helium ecosystem, both for IoT users and 5G users, right? Like any
Right.
data flow that travels through the network is ultimately beneficial to HNT holders and the network overall.
So really, I think critical mass is going to be a key thing here as you start to see more and more hotspots come on board. Obviously, this expands the network of networks. At some point down the road, do you see the future where helium could literally stand on its own?
I don't think it's out of the question. I mean, as I mentioned, there are some challenges around the spectrum. The CBRS operates at 3.5 gigahertz, which is quite high, and the propagation characteristics at that frequency are not great, right? So things like traveling through buildings and trees, and
Mm, okay.
all of that is more challenging. That doesn't mean it's impossible. If you look at the coverage map of IoT, for example, and picked a city like San Francisco and imagine every IoT hotspot being a 5G hotspot, I mean, you've got tremendous density
Hmm.
in some of these cities. So I don't think it's out of the question. I do think it matters where you focus. So a thing that I don't think a lot of people realize is 87% of cellular traffic actually occurs indoors. And indoors is actually like the hardest possible place for a traditional telecom deployer to get access to a small cell or a macro cell.
Yeah.
So this is where something like Helium 5G is going to be extremely differentiated and extremely unique. Is that
Hmm.
small cells are going to start popping up in all sorts of places that you could never feasibly put them in a traditional model. And I think that's going to make it very complementary to any macro network operator like T-Mobile, because there will be coverage in places where, quite frankly, they can't get it, or where they
Exactly.
can get it, but it's extremely expensive for them to do it today. So that's what I'm excited about, is like seeing this sort of hybrid sort of companion model play out in real time. I think is going to be amazing.
Yeah, I think that, it's very similar to what a lot of people refer to as last mile. You get inside, once you're on a mobile device, in many cases, that's why we've seen Wi-Fi calling really advance in terms of adoption, and also use cases around some of the devices that are kind of going that direction. On the map within Helium, and I mean, you guys do a great job with your site and, registering all and we've done some helium mining here in our own studio to take a look at kind of how this works. When we first started discovering Helium, how will the map interact with the actual hotspots in relationship to the actual coverage with T-Mobile? Will this also show up on the overall Helium map itself?
I'm not sure if we've decided the best way of representing this yet.
Hmm.
I think it's important that we're extremely clear about what's happening, and that's, I think, a challenge in these new models, right? Because you're sort of
Yeah,
trying to describe something to consumers that they've never seen before.
exactly.
And so
Yeah.
we certainly want to make sure that it's not misleading or ambiguous in any way, and we're not trying to represent that there are 5 million helium hotspots around the globe,
Hmm.
the country, or something like that. And so there'll be a way of doing this. We're spending time on it now. I think we've always been quite strong in terms of user interface and making what we think are complicated subjects easy for consumers to understand. I think it's part of why Helium has been successful so far, is that we've been able to take extremely complicated things like mining cryptocurrency and standing up IoT gateways and turn them into consumer propositions. And that's what we're continuing to do with the 5G radios and the 5G hotspots as well.
Let's talk a little quickly around the Solana Sega phone. Any plans around how that might integrate at some point down the road?
I'm excited about what they're trying to do, both with the SMS, the mobile stack that they have, but also the Saga phone. I think both are critical steps for mass crypto adoption. Like I think
Hmm.
private key control and sort of
Exactly.
self
Yeah.
custody is kind of a mess today. You know, the 12, 24 word thing is tough, right? And we've got 400,000 or 500,000 self custodians on our network, so we understand this very well. So I'm excited about that, and I'm excited about the Saga phone in particular and what that will enable. It's possible, for example, that Saga phone users would become proof of coverage mappers in the 5G network, right? Like it's completely feasible that if you're walking around with one of these things, that you are verifying the 5G coverage network at the same time. And so there's all kinds of exciting things to do. It was certainly one of the considerations. It wasn't a big one, but it was one of the considerations in picking Solana, was that they have a very big focus on mobile as a strategy, right? They understand that almost everything is mobile first these days, in a way that I haven't seen really paid attention to for any other blockchain project. And so that's exciting. And I think there'll be all kinds of collaboration opportunities, either directly with the Solana Labs team or third-party developers in that ecosystem that will take advantage of the SMS stack.
Yeah. Looking into just Solana's ecosystem, you look at the dApps, you also look at their prowess in the NFT space. You look at some of the key projects like Audius and Steppen, et cetera, that well known in the Solana ecosystem. Any chance for dApp or NFT integration with how this might flow out with Helium as a whole?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, every single hotspot on the Helium network is actually going to be represented as an NFT on the Solana network. So it will be the largest mint by far on. That's probably the biggest danger from a congestion point. Actually, is the initial mint. But we'll figure out some strategy to make that sane. And I know the NFT teams there have all sorts of interesting compression technology and all sorts of stuff going on there. That's exciting. But that's going to, again, that's going to be super cool. I mean, you now are going to be able to trade hotspot NFTs on, Metaplex or something, right? And maybe Steppen users are proof of coverage mappers as well. That there's all this sort of composability and like crossover opportunity that you get by being part of this bigger ecosystem. And I'm super excited about where that goes and how that develops. We're in touch with a couple of those teams, but in general, I expect this to sort of play out over the next several months and post migration. And part of what excites me about platforms is you don't know what people are going to do, right? You give them, they now have access to the tools, and they might go do all sorts of things that we are not expecting. And I'm excited about seeing what they do.
Yeah, innovation kind of has its own way of finding ways to fill the problems of society in a big way, for sure. Okay, so Amir, when you look at the scenario of Solana and some of the challenge that chain has had over the last year or 18 months, and also I think in terms of just its address as a solution for transactions, especially in the Web3 space down the road, what we will see with Solana. If this doesn't work out with Solana, I mean, do you have a backup plan? Because in many cases, that's kind of always a wonder. When you start these kinds of partnerships, it does create a little bit of uncertainty.
The design that we proposed in HIP 70 is pretty resilient to both chain outages, but also opens the door for subsequent migrations if we need to in the future. I highly doubt that is going to be a thing that we're worried about here. But just to sort of play it out for a second, I mean, the Oracle design means that the kinds of transactions that get written to a blockchain are kind of portable, right? Like you could imagine moving the token part of the logic to a different chain, and then updating the oracles to talk to a different chain, and that being a way to mitigate some catastrophic scenario. But I have absolute confidence that will not be a problem. I think when you look at the performance of Solana, it's sort of, and this is something that we've experienced very acutely, it's very easy to have perfect reliability and consistency when the network isn't doing a whole lot, right? So when there aren't that many transactions or there aren't that many hotspots, everything was running great, right, at the start when we had 150 hotspots. But as soon as you get to 1 million, it gets harder. And I think that is kind of the case in the Solana ecosystem, is that it is processing more transactions than every other chain combined, multiplied by something. And so, during the process of HIP 70, we had these other L1 supporters sort of coming in and saying, why didn't you pick this thing? It's perfectly reliable. Yeah. It's easy to be reliable when you don't have much going on. And so I think that creates good pressure on the Solana team and community to sort of focus on what they're good at, which is effectively building the fastest and most scalable L1 blockchain. And so it just, I think they've done an amazing job of on both the technology side, but especially on the community side. Like the activity in the developer community there is furious and very exciting. And I think that's really where you want to be looking, right? Like what are developers doing? I'm kind of reminded of, you remember when Windows Mobile came out and Microsoft was trying to pay developers to
get
build
developers to
applications?
jump on board.
Yeah,
yes, I remember
that doesn't
that.
work, right? Developers will go where they want to go because the tooling is the best tooling or the platform is the best platform.
Yeah,
and I think that's what you're seeing with Solana, and other chains are trying to sort of lure developers in other ways, but Solana's been incredibly effective at that.
Yeah, I think the adoption opportunity definitely huge here for what we'll see in the future. And to your point, the scalability, based on the size of the Helium network, I mean, scalability had to be one of the critical components here for growth, because obviously you guys have been growing at exponential rates. Plus, you're really starting to move in more of a global footprint, which I think is obviously going to get into some very unique scenarios, especially as we play this out in countries that have somewhat developed networks out there in terms of cellular networks, but don't necessarily have the Wi-Fi infrastructure, or even to a certain extent IoT. So I think that'll be pretty huge for you guys in terms of a scalable solution. Talk about the roadmap for a second, because I know this is, I'm always curious, what's next step? These are big moves around the partnership with obviously Solana and T-Mobile kind of coming back to back. What are some of the next real big, boulder moving scenarios you guys got to get into?
Well, there's a lot there. I mean, we've been underway with the design of the oracles and the implementation of the oracles for a little while here, because we knew we wanted to do that regardless what the L1 chain decision would have ended up being. That was a sort of design or a technical direction we were heading in anyway. So a bunch of good work has already gone in there. So feeling pretty good about how that's progressing. There's some alpha, beta, like public trials or tests coming up that we're excited about, that we'll get some feedback from the community on. The Solana work, I think, is about to start. I am less literate in Solana land than I should be at this point, but I know that work is less complicated seeming to us than the Oracle work is. It's primarily around token minting and redemption. I think there's a different set of concerns there, like the security audits and like how do you make sure this thing is reliable, and like you kind of got very public scrutiny on the code in a way that we didn't have on Helium, where everything was open source, but it's sort of security by obscurity a little bit, whereas many people are very, very familiar with Solana smart contracts and looking for exploits and holes. And so I think you have to be cautious there in a very different way. So that work is, I think, about to start or starting. I think the foundation team is actually going to be taking the lead there. So there's plenty going on. Then obviously the integration work with T-Mobile themselves, improvements on the 5G network and the hardware and the firmware there. There's some interesting and good 5G hardware announcements coming up very, very soon, which we're going to be excited to talk about, that will change the economics quite significantly. Right. So yeah, just a lot. I mean, just a lot. I don't know where to start
where to begin.
In terms of what. Yeah, there's just so much going on. But we're still optimistic that we can get Solana done by the end of the year. That's still the hope.
Yeah, and you're going into an area that, I mean, is one of the key cornerstones of the entire modern world in terms of communications. Whether you layer it in from the IoT standards, obviously, into what we're seeing now within 5G and the development and rollout of what we'll see with 5G, and how that will play into not only your tech, but other platforms, I think, that are going to start moving in this direction, which is kind of ironic that we haven't seen a major carrier go this direction before. I was even taken back because I kind of thought, new innovation, this would be something that really started to move in that direction for major carriers. Obviously, T-Mobile is more of a edgier, thought process. Their team definitely much more innovative, at least when I look at just some of the things they're doing. All right, so this is cool in the sense that you guys you're going in the right direction here. I think there's a lot to look at here in terms of upside for where Helium could be and really could be going in the future. When you look at the overall framework of adoption, because this is the one thing that everybody is always asking about, how quickly can you scale? If you've got the devices are there, and now you're layering in potentially 5G devices and maybe even cellular devices at some point, how do the economies of scale work in relationship to the actual economy of mining? Because obviously we're going to see a lift in numbers across a lot of different areas, IoT, 5G, et cetera. Does it change any of the dynamics around how the economy itself will run within HNT?
The most critical thing about the economic design in HNT is data consumption, right? Like ultimately, the only way to create a self-sustaining economy is if there is demand for users to actually use the network that's being built.
Okay.
We've always been aware of that. That's always been the design, right? Like we designed the economic structure to exactly work this way and be deflationary when there's a lot of demand and a lot of usage. With IoT, it's different from a cellular network, right? There aren't hundreds of millions of IoT devices out there today that use the LoRaWAN protocol that you can just make switch to Helium, right? Like this process takes time. I always use the example of there's a customer of the Helium network that has built a tracking sensor that looks like a piece of tape, and you can tape it onto a box or a package or whatever and track it that way. But they have been building that solution for as long as we have been building the Helium network, and they are now ready with it. But now they are going to market with it, and so it takes time. This is a 4, 5, 6 year process for them to go to market with a product built from scratch. And so we think a decade is about the approximate timeline to see real adoption on the IoT network. And when I say real adoption, I'm talking about hundreds of millions of devices using the network.
Right.
The network moves billions of packets a year as it is today. But you need hundreds of millions of devices moving hundreds of billions of packets a day in order for that to really be what I would consider successful. On the cellular side, it's kind of a slightly different story, right? Like there are existing devices out there in the wild that work and are compatible. No one has to build something from scratch in order to be able to be compatible with the Helium 5G network or be a Helium Mobile subscriber. The amount of data something like a smartphone uses is completely different from what an IoT device uses, where it may only send a message once a week or something like that. So it's very different economically. But what I think is important is that everyone in the HNT ecosystem benefits from usage on either network, and ultimately any network, right? Like it won't end at just 5G. There's already a proposal for a Wi-Fi network, and there's a proposal for a VPN network. And so the design is effectively that any time data is being consumed, HNT is being destroyed. And when HNT is destroyed, it's very deflationary on the economics, which should be a benefit for everyone in the system. So that's a very important thing for people to realize, that especially for those that aren't inside the US, right? Because Helium Mobile and Helium 5G today is a US only proposition because it's the only jurisdiction where there's a spectrum that you can use. But the effect of like massive data consumption will be beneficial for everyone in the ecosystem, whether you're an IoT miner in India or whether you're a 5G hotspot operator in New York. Like everyone benefits from the fact that more data is being consumed across the network.
Yeah, so I think this has been it's been a good conversation. I've learned a lot around what you guys are doing in terms, and I like the exchange with Helium and Solana, because I would agree. I'm still a skeptic on Solana, but also very optimistic about what that project can do, just in the sense of where it's going. And I would say still that Solana is next to Ethereum is probably my favorite chain in terms of future opportunities down the road. So I think you guys, good job on I think obviously on the entire network. I know we have a poll coming up and then a couple of questions here, Amir. Let's take a look at the poll. All right, so would you ever use crypto-powered carrier as your mobile service provider? Yes, I'd want to contribute and earn 83%. So a lot of people going this direction. Do you think we'll see other carriers going down this path in the future?
I mean, it's really, like, telecom is such an interesting industry. It's like one of those industries where no one is really that happy with their incumbent provider. Like you can't find that many people who are like, yeah, I love AT&T. I've never heard that, sentiment like relayed, even though they, by all accounts, do a pretty good job. So it's one of those that I think is really ripe for disruption from a consumer point of view. And there are things that I think, especially in the crypto space, that we're all worried about, whether it's privacy or SIM swapping, and like there's crypto specific sentiment that I think matters for the early adoption of the network. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see others going in this direction. Like we just as with the IoT network, like we've shown it can be done, and other people will come along and try and do the same thing.
I was listening to CZ talk the other day, and he mentioned this whole issue with the wallet as probably being one of the biggest challenges for mass adoption. You even mentioned it to your effect there of how do we get away from that? Obviously, the phone is and has become somewhat of the modern day wallet. And I know even within our own team, our researchers, et cetera, the mobile device is super critical in being able to interface with so many different apps. In many cases, some of these are only mobile, ready and don't even have a website. So, in essence of user interfaces, but I think that's going to be a pretty big opportunity in the future in terms of really solving that wallet situation. A couple of questions here. It would be nice if we could stake HNT on the Solana network. Anything planned there?
No plans
Staking.
there. It's an interesting. We certainly want to make staking for oracles available, right? So if you wanted to run
Okay.
a proof of coverage oracle or a data coverage or a data transfer oracle, that there's a way for the community to do that and to participate. There is also a staking mechanism within the Helium network called VEHNT, which is like this vote escrowed HNT that allows you to vote in these governance proposals. So those are all sort of within the HNT ecosystem, but no plans to allow HNT staking on the Sol side specifically.
Real Talk sent in a super chat saying, "Will the Solana Saga phone have Helium benefits?" UX only. Is that something that transition-wise would see something in the Saga phone?
We haven't gotten into it deeply yet. I think there's been all sorts of ideas and discussions, some of them around the wallet, as you pointed out, with the private key storage, which I think is a huge deal. We've all talked about, could you use it as a proof of coverage mapper, so you can verify the location of Helium 5G hotspots by just walking around with your phone. So there's ideas, really good ones. We just haven't gotten into any of the details around implementation or feasibility yet.
How do you see the gaming side of things working with this? I mean, I look at people talking about, just different kinds of applications and dApps. Eventually, we'll start to see more and more on the Solana network. How does that play out, do you think, in the future for Helium?
I mean, I see the question of Pokemon on Helium. I mean, one of the things that we were joking about is like a Pokemon Go style of like proof of coverage mapping. Absolutely possible. And I think some people know I have a gaming background, so I've always been interested in what can be done around gaming as it relates to blockchains and crypto. And again, it's an area where I think Solana is far ahead of everyone else. And so, I'm excited about AR style real world gaming opportunities as it relates to like mapping and proof of coverage and stuff like that. So I think that's, again, one of those areas where we'll see what the community comes up with. I think there's going to be all sorts of cool stuff.
Yeah, John comes on. Want to know from you in terms of the number of accessories or potential advancement in accessories. A lot of smart devices, especially around the home, etc. IoT enabled in many cases. How would those play out, and any future for H&T to be involved in some of those industries? Or
this is one of those. This is one of those places where there's a little bit of lag between a network existing and people building the devices that use the network. Like up until now, LoRaWAN, which is the IoT protocol we use in the Helium network, has really been commercial applications only, right? Because you had to kind of build your own network in order to use the sensors, right? So if you're a warehouse or a factory or a refinery or something like that, you could create coverage there. But there hasn't really ever been a home application or really any good consumer applications because there wasn't a network to use. So now there is, and we're now starting to see some really interesting consumer and home-facing applications coming, and I expect to see that accelerate.
Yeah, I just saw a release from NordVPN, who has now got a hardware device that is now making it a Wi-Fi hardware. So they've already gone into that direction. Obviously, a VPN that's resident for homes, but is built into a hardware aspect. Most likely, we'll see this in some of the scenarios around satellite. Eventually, whether we see something with Starlink, things like that. A lot of good stuff coming in from the audience out there. Definitely great having you on, Amir. Thank you so much for stopping in. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. All right, so again, you guys are tuned in maybe over on the podcast side of things right now. For these live streams, one of the things you can do to catch these live and really kind of get this alpha that we do here on the channel when we do deep dives and founder and CEO interviews like we've done here with Helium, is you got to get in on the YouTube channel. And the best way is to just subscribe and then hit that little bell right there on the channel. It's going to give you a notification. So the next time you're on YouTube, if you come to our channel, you can hit that notify me button. You can do that. But the best thing is, hopefully, if the notifications work right with YouTube, sometimes I know it's a little weird, you're going to get a pop-up and you're going to know we're coming live. And that way you'll catch this as quickly as possible, because in many cases, it does have a great advantage to be first when you're out there learning about projects and really kind of the next steps. If you're not into the Diamond Circle, make sure and jump into that. It's a free newsletter. We do it here. It's, gosh, almost 80,000 people in that now. And the cool thing is we drop a couple of emails a week. It's a way to keep up with what's going on here at the channel, but even more so, some of our AMAs, some of our research, etc., all make it in to that email as well. If you guys want to catch me, it is out there on Twitter, @Paul Barron. We'll catch you next time right here on TechPath.